Paranormal Believers of Reddit. What was an event that made you a believer? Over the years, my whole family has had strange encounters with an apparition in our house. It's always the same figure, a tall man, dressed in a pea coat and one of those classic NYC business hats, standing near the doorway. There were other times when we'd see a shadow darting across the basement. Once I was down there when my brother asked if I was in my room upstairs. I wasn't, but he swore he saw someone sitting on my bed. Doors would sometimes close on their own, and lights would flicker on and off. It never really scared us, though, so we ended up naming him Edward the Ghost. What's strange is that this house was newly built, with no previous history other than being an empty field before construction. My father ran a photography studio from 1975 to 2005. He closed the business when digital photography took over, and he found it hard to compete with hobbyists. Alongside the studio, he also owned color labs and other photography-related businesses. This story happened in the 90s during one of his wedding shoots at a small, rural Catholic church in Kansas. The bride and her mother prayed that her deceased grandmother would somehow be there during the ceremony. Afterward, my father sent the unedited proofs to the family for them to choose their photos for the wedding album. The family called him back, asking about a series of 4 to 5 photos they found strange. In these images, there appeared to be an apparition standing next to the couple as they knelt at the altar. The figure was a woman, dressed in a full-length white gown, her face veiled. Her dress covered her feet, but her hands were visible, resting at her sides. She was turned at a 45 degrees angle, facing both the kneeling couple and the priest officiating the ceremony. A candle behind her illuminated one side of her body more brightly than the other. The images were clear as day. My father checked the negatives, and sure enough, the same figure appeared there as well. But there was no one at the wedding dressed like that, and certainly no one standing next to the bride and groom at the altar. The family believed it was a miracle. Before my father passed away in 2011, we had a conversation about these photos. He couldn't explain them. It was all done on film, 10 years before he even began working with digital photography, and he never learned the advanced techniques needed to manipulate digital images. I asked him about double exposure or other film tricks, but he said none of his techniques could have produced this effect. The woman wasn't overlaid on the image. She appeared to be standing beside the altar, participating in the ceremony with depth and clarity. To the day he died, my father had no explanation for those photos. It was one of our final conversations, and I'll never forget it. The images are at my mom's house now, and I've been thinking about digitizing them and maybe sharing them with the skeptic community to see what other explanations they might have. But to this day, I believe the grandmother was there, standing beside the altar. I'm not sure what that means about what happens after we die, but at the very least, it suggests that family connections might extend beyond the grave. After my gran passed away in Georgia, I started finding pink feathers on me every day for months. At the time, I was living 3,000 miles away in California, so it wasn't like there was anything around me or at home that would explain it. The thing is, my gran always loved the color pink, and after a while, those pink feathers became oddly comforting. I'm not saying I believe in ghosts or anything like that, but I can't deny that I miss finding those feathers. It felt like a little sign from her, something I'll always hold on to. The day my father passed away, around the time he was believed to have taken his own life, something strange happened. I was sitting on my couch when I saw a dark shadow, shaped like a person, walk past me. It lingered for a moment, then disappeared. I had fell off earlier that day. Something in my gut made me sit up, even though I'd been lying down. The next day, I got a call from my sister informing me that he had passed the previous afternoon. Since then, I can't help but feel like he still visits me from time to time. I ended up buying the house he owned when he died. Sometimes, when I'm in the workshop, I get overwhelmed with grief. I didn't know until later that this was where he had hung himself. I was never told the exact location until the poor soul who found him shared the details with me. All of this has made me believe in the paranormal a bit more than I did before. Not long after, when my neighbor's mother passed away, I could swear I smelled her perfume and cigarette smoke in my house. She had lived here as a child, and it was so strong, like she was still around. This one's a little strange, and I don't expect everyone to believe it, but I swear it happened. My parents insist they had nothing to do with it, though. I had these large sliding wardrobe doors in my bedroom, which we use for storage. Stuff like the Christmas tree in its box, clothes, old items, just clutter really. After my grandfather passed away, I remember being upset one night because I realized I couldn't remember what his voice sounded like. I had this odd habit too. Whenever I was upset or struggling, I'd end up sleepwalking into the spare bedroom. That room used to be mine when I was younger, and I'd sleep there without even realizing it. So, that night I was half awake, lying on my back in the spare room. Everything was quiet, but suddenly the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I froze. It wasn't quite fear, but I knew something was happening. The air felt different, and then I distinctly heard my grandfather's voice. He said, "It's only me, you daft bugger," in that cheerful tone he always had, like he was smiling when he said it. As soon as I heard it, that uneasy feeling faded, and I fell back to sleep. The next morning, my mom woke me up. She knew something was bothering me whenever I ended up in the spare room. When she walked in, she stopped stunned. My grandfather's old walking stick was leaning against the wall near my bed. The thing is, the stick had been tucked away in the other bedroom wardrobe, buried under clutter in the back. She would have had to move everything out to get to it, and she swears she didn't. It could have been a coincidence, or maybe my mind playing tricks on me because I missed him so much. But somehow, I needed to hear his voice again, and I did, even if it was just for that one night. After that, I sometimes found myself hoping to hear him again whenever I stayed in that room, but it never happened. It might sound unbelievable, but I really needed that, and I feel like I got it somehow. I've never experienced anything like that since. I worked as a CNA at a nursing home in Ames, Iowa. One night, another CNA, a seasoned aide with over 30 years of experience, and I were doing our overnight rounds. When we opened the door to one of the residents' rooms, we saw something that made my blood run cold. White dress shoes and white pants that seemed to fade into nothing as you looked up. My colleague screamed and ran out of the room in a panic, and I just froze for a moment before closing the door. I managed to coax her back to finish our rounds, but after that shift, she never came back to work. 30 years of experience, and she just walked away. There were other strange occurrences during my time there too, but I don't like to label them. As for ghosts, I'm not sure what to call them, but I can say with certainty that there's something real to these experiences. I wouldn't consider myself a believer in anything supernatural, but there was one moment that I just can't explain. I saw an apparition of a man in a red shirt walking across my fenced-in backyard, just for a split second. I shook my head, dismissing it, and didn't say a word. Then out of nowhere, my 3-year-old, who had been sitting next to me, asked, "Who was that man in the red shirt?" I'm still not one to jump to conclusions or get superstitious, but after that, well, that was something I can't deny. It felt real. While I lived in a house that seemed to be haunted, my perspective on the paranormal changed completely. I've always had an interest in ghosts and unexplained phenomena, but I consider myself a skeptic until I moved into this place. I'm not the type to get vibes or feel the energy of space, but this house, it felt evil. And here are just a few of the things that happened. One night, I had a sleep paralysis episode where I hallucinated seeing a little boy outside my window. The next day, my mom told me about a dream she had where a little boy was staring at me through that same window. Another time, I was up late in the summer. We didn't have air conditioning, so my window was wide open. Outside, there was a small stoop with a lawn chair. Suddenly, I heard the lawn chair scrape across the stoop as if someone had thrown it out of the way to get closer to my window. I honestly thought I was about to die. Then, my window started violently rattling as if someone was shaking it from the outside. The next day, I tested it, and the only way I could make that noise was by shaking the window from inside my room. But the absolute worst part of living in that house was a noise that only happened when I went to bed. It came from inside the wall, right where I laid my head down to sleep. This was the same wall where the window rattling happened. The noise is hard to describe, but it sounded like a rain stick being scraped, only much sharper and more disturbing. I'd hear it every time I laid down to sleep, but never at any other time. I convinced myself at first that it was just wind blowing a vine against the house. Maybe it was scraping the wall by chance, and the timing was just coincidental. That gave me some comfort until one night when the noise was incredibly loud, and I looked out to see that there wasn't even the slightest breeze. The air was completely still. It got to the point where I couldn't sleep in my bed anymore. I started crashing on the couch, and I didn't sleep in that bed again until I moved out. The noise itself was creepy, but what still bothers me to this day is how perfectly timed it was. No matter when I went to bed, sometimes at 10 p.m., sometimes at 2 a.m., it always started the moment my head hit the pillow. It didn't happen when I laid down just to watch TV or check my phone. It was like whatever was causing that noise knew exactly what I was doing and was trying to mess with me. I've got more stories, but it's getting late, and now I'm starting to creep myself out. When I was living with my parents in the basement, we'd have some weird things happen every now and then. My CD player would turn on and start spinning a disc, even though it was unplugged and the battery compartment was empty. The TV would change channels or adjust the volume on its own, and things would randomly move around. But it never happened while you were looking at it. We'd leave my room, go play in the kids' room next door, and when we came back to grab something, my toys would be slightly rearranged. But the one that really freaked me out happened after a ghost tour in Victoria, British Columbia. We visited a building that had once been a brothel during the gold rush. During renovations, they had found the remains of about 10 women buried beneath the floors. The whole experience felt off, but I shrugged it off. I went to bed that night, but I woke up around 4 a.m. for some reason. Suddenly, I started thinking about the tour, specifically about this nasty bouncer they mentioned. And for some strange reason, I thought, well, maybe he didn't mean to hurt those girls. He must have just been misunderstood. He wasn't a bad guy. Then, as I had this thought, I froze. I opened my eyes, and standing there at the foot of my bed was a dark, shadowy figure about 6 feet tall, wearing a bowler hat. It was just staring at me. I couldn't look away. I locked eyes with it for what felt like a solid 10 minutes, totally frozen. The light in the room kept increasing as dawn approached, but the figure never lost its shape, and it didn't move an inch. I finally snapped out of it, bolted from bed, and shook my partner awake. The second I looked away from the figure, it vanished. Could have been sleep paralysis? Sure. But I've never experienced it before, and I've never had an experience like that in the 12 years since. I was 13 when I saw my great-grandmother standing in my doorway. It was around 3 o'clock in the morning. She lived at least 20 miles away, and she had been dead for over a week. She didn't have any eyes, and her expression wasn't one I recognized. She didn't look happy, which was strange because I only ever saw her angry once in life. What stood out the most, though, was how every time I've seen something clearly enough to make out details, it's always been the same. No eyes, and an unusually serious, almost unsettling look. I've had 2 ghostly experiences that stand out. The first one happened when we moved into a beautiful Victorian house. I started waking up on the floor for no reason. At first, we thought I was just rolling off the bed in my sleep, but then it escalated. One night, I woke up to the sensation of someone yanking me by the ankle. My mom burned sage around the house, and it stopped after that. The second incident happened in the same house. Keep in mind, this place had no AC or heat, just windows and a fireplace. During the last summer we lived there, the whole house would be hot, but my mom's room was always ice cold. She liked it at first, but then things took a darker turn. She started waking up with bruises on her arms, which gradually progressed into vivid dreams of being grabbed or scratched in dark rooms. When she woke up, the marks were always there. It got worse, so we moved out soon after. I've always been somewhat of a believer, but my personal experiences have been strange. Most of it has been poltergeist activity, which has occurred in 2 of the 3 houses I've lived in. But one night, I had a particularly disturbing sleep paralysis episode. I've had these before, and thankfully I don't usually experience visual hallucinations, except for this time. I was lying in bed, completely frozen, when a woman crawled onto me. Her skin was a sickly beige, leathery and cracked, and instead of legs, she had 6 arms arranged like an insect's. She hovered above my face, her gray teeth visible through a lipless mouth, and her hair was tangled and filthy. She just breathed over me. Then I woke up, terrified but thinking it was just another episode of sleep paralysis. But as I laid there, I suddenly smelled something awful, urine. The smell was so strong, it was like a bucket of it had been poured right under my nose. I thought maybe I had pissed myself in fear, but when I checked, I hadn't. The smell faded as quickly as it came, but that whole experience left me shaken in a way no bad dream ever had. I've since wondered if it was some kind of minor demon or a fey creature, something that travels and induces nightmares to feed on fear. When we were growing up, my sister was always convinced that our family home was haunted. We lived in the UK, in an old house, and there were always strange noises at night, but I never actually saw anything. Fast forward to last year, and my sister and I had both moved out. Sometimes, when Mom and Dad were away, we'd stay at the house to look after things, like the animals and the house itself. Around 2018, they'd done an extension on the house, adding a big double bedroom with an en-suite where there had been nothing before. The room was arranged so that the bed faced directly across from the door, and from there you could see out onto the landing. One evening, I was staying in that room with my dogs. Mom was in her room at the other end of the house. The dogs were lying peacefully on the bed with me, and I had just drifted off to sleep when I was suddenly woken up by the sound of something running across the attic or loft right above my head, to the right of the room, and then back again. It wasn't my imagination. I could tell the dogs had heard it too. As they were looking up toward the ceiling, their ears perked. I figured it was probably just rats or bats, so I turned over and tried to go back to sleep. But as I turned, I noticed someone peering around the doorway. It was definitely a woman. I wasn't terrified, but I was definitely unsettled. At first, I thought it might be Mom, so I called out, "Mom?" There was no reply. I called again, but still nothing. That's when I switched on the light, and of course, there was no one there. I got up and checked Mom's room, and sure enough, she was fast asleep in bed. It was around 4 a.m. At that point, so I went back to bed, feeling a bit shaken, but I didn't mention it to anyone. A couple of months later, we were all gathered at Mom's house for Christmas, and my sister and her partner were trying to convince me to have a few drinks and stay the night in the big room. Without hesitation, I turned them down. My sister's boyfriend's face dropped, and he asked me why. I simply said I didn't feel comfortable in that room. That's when he, without me saying anything more, asked, "Have you seen the lady?" He went on to describe the exact same thing I had experienced, the woman at the doorway. It turns out his 14-year-old daughter had seen her too. So, my car is kind of haunted. Every once in a while, when you're walking toward it and you're looking at it out of the corner of your eye, rather than head on, you'll spot what definitely looks like the silhouette of a woman. But as soon as you try to get a clearer look, she ducks down between the front and back seats. At first, I thought I was just imagining it, but I've seen it happen by myself, with others who also saw it, and even my roommate has witnessed it too, with other people without me there when borrowing my car. It always looks and behaves the same way, and after 5 years of living with it, it seemed pretty harmless, so I've never bothered to investigate further. This wasn't paranormal, but more of a cryptid encounter. My father and uncle run a local organic salt business, and on June 19th, 2021, I got an early morning call from my dad. He told me that his loader had gotten a DUI, and since I had weekends off at my job, he knew I was free to help load the salt bags onto the trailer. I said, "All right, what the hell?" and agreed to help. So my dad and uncle picked me up, and we headed out to the salt field. I can't give away the exact location because they still harvest there, but it's somewhere between Northern California and Oregon. We were finishing up the salt harvest, loading about 3/4 of the trailer when my uncle suddenly yelled, "What the hell is that?" We all turned, and about half a mile away, on the ridge of a hill, was a huge Sasquatch walking slowly across the ridge. My dad and uncle are old school, so they still use flip phones that they clip onto their belts. By the time I pulled out my iPhone to get a picture, it had already disappeared over the ridge. I was never really a believer before that, but what I saw looked exactly like the Sasquatch in the famous Patterson film. Now, I'm fully convinced that what I saw was real, and I believe that old video is authentic too. It was surreal, and honestly, I've never seen anything like it before. I've never seen ghosts or anything else, but that experience definitely changed my perspective. I booked a night at the Thomas House Hotel in Tennessee, staying in room 18. It was a public event with about 17 other people. While I was there, I witnessed a cat ball move across the table I was sitting at. Later, in the doorframe of my room, I saw what looked like the shadow figure of the late owner of the hotel. The most bizarre experience, though, was when something tugged on my natural hair, almost like it was saying, "I've never seen hair like this before." Me. I remember this one night from when I was a kid. I had this incredibly vivid dream in the back of Dad's car. It was dark out, we were driving home from somewhere, and I nodded off. I dreamed of this massive UFO. We were. My sister, cutting in, passing a gas station. It was on the right side. There was a bridge up ahead, running at a right angle to the road, maybe 200 meters away. And then, the UFO. Me, which was disc-shaped. Sister, with these small orange-yellow lights all around the edge. Me, suddenly swooped up out of nowhere, its underside facing us. There was this blinding flash. Sister, and then we were just home. Then our dad, very quietly, says, "For 20 years I thought I just zoned out on the highway. Nothing, absolutely nothing, has ever explained this." A shared memory between two kids could be chalked up to a dream or something we saw on TV. But Dad remembering it too? That's what makes it truly unsettling. 57 days of my childhood are just gone. I only remember bits and pieces. According to my mother, I vanished after laying down for a nap. She searched everywhere and reported me missing right away. No trace of me. Then just like that, I woke up in my room again. It was Christmas Day, 2003. I remember my mom crying, asking where I'd been. The police were there. I was taken to counseling. Apparently, I kept telling them about a place I call Zookland. I don't remember a lot about it now, just that it felt peaceful. Other kids were there too. I especially think about one boy I played with a lot, though his face is hazy. I came back with a strange burn mark on my right forearm, a small brown spot about the size of a quarter with a white dot in the center. I've had it ever since. I know it sounds unbelievable, but whatever Zookland was, it felt like a good place. I remember that much. Our whole family experienced what I can only describe as poltergeist activity in the house. Objects moving on their own, strange noises, that kind of thing. At the time, none of us really talked about it. We all just kept it to ourselves, maybe thinking we were imagining things. It wasn't until much later that we finally started comparing stories. That's when we found out that our dad had once seen an old woman standing silently in a doorway, just staring at him in the middle of the night while he was sleeping in the lounge. He never mentioned it at the time. Eventually, we asked, out loud, for whatever it was to leave us alone. And it did. I've had all kinds of strange things happen. Objects flying off shelves, footsteps in the hallway when no one else was home, things vanishing and then showing up later in completely random spots. My bed has shaken for no reason, and I've even been woken up by something grabbing my arm. And honestly, that's just the start. The weird part is, my mom has experienced a lot of the same things. So at least I know I wasn't imagining it. It wasn't just me. Before this, I never had a direct experience with the paranormal, but I've always been sensitive to certain things. You know that feeling when something's just off, even if you can't explain why? That's always been a quiet part of my life. Things changed when I started dating my boyfriend. He was still living at his mom's house, and I stayed over pretty often. From the first time I stepped inside, the place gave me weird vibes. Every room felt different, like each one had its own energy. Some made you feel tense, some strangely quiet. There were odd sounds, strange drafts. It never felt comfortable. One night, we were upstairs in bed, just about to fall asleep, when we started hearing something coming from the living room directly below us. At first, we tried to write it off. Maybe the fan in our room was making a weird noise. Maybe the AC had kicked on. Maybe his mom turned on the TV. Anything rational we could think of. He got up to turn off the fan, just to rule that out. While he was up, he peeked into his mom's room, right across the hall. She was in bed, lights off, clearly hadn't moved. Nothing in the house seemed out of place, no electronics were on. When he came back and the fan was off, the sound got louder and clearer. It sounded like a full-blown conversation was happening right beneath us. 2 or more people talking, only we couldn't make out the words, just the tone and rhythm of a real conversation. But the TV was off. No radio, no voices from outside, nothing. And here's the weirdest part. We couldn't hear the sound anywhere else in the house, only in that room. Not in the hallway, not from downstairs. Just there. It's an old house, and with how thin the walls are, it's usually pretty easy to figure out where any sound is coming from. This didn't follow those rules. It wasn't muffled or distant. It felt like it was in the room, but invisible. That night was the first time I genuinely had no logical explanation. And it wasn't a one-time thing. The voices became a recurring event. Eventually, we got used to it in that strange, resigned way you do with the unexplainable. But other things started happening too, more than I can even get into here. This was the moment that really opened my eyes. Before this, I was a skeptic with gut feelings. After that night, I became a believer. When my mom gave birth to identical twins, tragically, one of them was stillborn. After my surviving brother came home from the hospital and his twin had been buried, strange things began happening in the house. Late at night, my mom would hear toys on the far side of the room, nowhere near my brother's crib, suddenly switch on and start playing by themselves. At first, you might assume it was just my brother getting up and playing with them, but that wasn't possible. He's severely disabled and physically unable to get out of bed on his own, especially at that age. Even more unsettling, he would sometimes babble and coo the way babies do when they're interacting with another baby, except he was completely alone. Fast forward 6 years. I was walking past his bedroom one evening and saw him sitting there quietly in the dark, the room dimly lit by the glow of his iPad screen. It struck me as a little odd, so I took a few steps back to check on him. The room was empty. I ran downstairs, and there he was, sitting on the sofa in the living room with his iPad, right where he'd been the whole time. I tried to chalk it up to my eyes playing tricks on me or some weird coincidence. But honestly, the only thing that really makes sense is that I might have seen the ghost of his twin. There have been other, smaller paranormal things around the house too. Nothing quite as intense, but still completely unexplainable. It's like something's always just slightly there. So many strange things happen in that place, but one experience stands out the most. It still gives me chills. I was in my early 20s, living with my then boyfriend, now ex, in what used to be my grandpa's old workshop. After he passed, it had been converted into a finished garage, and that's where we were staying. From early on, my ex would complain that the house felt like it was watching him, especially after we argued. He claimed to see objects fall over for no reason, pictures fly off the walls, and said he'd sometimes feel someone breathing on the back of his neck or his blankets getting pulled off in the middle of the night. I always brushed it off until one day when things got scary. Our relationship had taken a turn for the worse, and during a particularly bad fight, he got physical. He shoved me and said something cruel. and right at that moment, the kitchen table flipped over. Completely. As in, all four legs up in the air, a full 180. There was no damage to the table. No broken legs, no loose screws. Nothing had tipped it. Even stranger, everything that had been on the table wasn't scattered, but stacked neatly next to it on the floor. It was one of the freakiest, most unexplainable things I've ever witnessed. After that, I stopped doubting that something or someone was still in that house. When I was younger, I just knew my mom had passed away, even though I didn't get official confirmation from her country in Europe until last year. But deep down, I already felt it. One thing that's always followed me is hearts. I see them all the time in the most unexpected places. One day, while walking through a forest, I said out loud, I want to see 3 hearts. And if it's my mom sending them, let them appear one after the other. Not even 2 minutes into the walk, I came across exactly that. 3 hearts, all made of moss, perfectly spaced. It was immediate. It was clear. I knew it was her. She still sends them. And now I've started taking photos of the ones I find because it happens so often. It's honestly beautiful. When I was little, I had an imaginary friend named Elvis. My grandmother, I'll call her Nana for this story, used to ask me questions about him, like what he looked like. I described him in detail, and looking back, I basically described Elvis Presley, right down to his voice. This imaginary friend would sing me to sleep, and I remember him telling me he had a twin brother who had died. One day, Elvis told me something strange, that my Nana was going to die soon. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was just a kid, so I told her, not fully understanding what I was saying. 2 months later, my Nana passed away. And a week after her funeral, Elvis, my imaginary friend, was gone. He never came back. Back in 2nd grade, I remember one of the twin brothers who lived a block over got on the bus one morning looking completely shaken. His blonde, bowl-cut hair was a mess, and he'd clearly been crying. Naturally, I asked his twin what had happened. He told me his brother had seen a ghost the night before, a man standing in their hallway, crying and begging for help. As kids do, we all laughed it off and teased him the whole bus ride to school. None of us took it seriously. Fast forward to when I was about 20. We were having dinner with my uncle one night, and he and my dad, who both grew up in the same neighborhood back in the 60s, were swapping old stories. My uncle suddenly brings up this teenager who had taken his own life in a car in the garage of a house nearby. Same house the twins had lived in. I nearly choked on my dinner. All these years later, that ghost story from the bus hit completely differently. Wild. I know this sounds unbelievable, but when I was little, something really strange happened. I was almost run over by a car. There was this figure standing across the street from me, not human, and they pointed at me and said, "Die." Right after that, it felt like something was pulling me toward the street, like I had no control over my body. As I stepped off the sidewalk, a car came speeding down the road, heading straight for me. Luckily, my mom was quick and yanked me away just in time. When I asked her about it, she said the street was completely empty, no people around, just the car. I've had so many experiences like this, and a lot of people don't believe me. They think I'm making it up. My mom has her own stories too, but she prefers to just ignore them. I do a lot of work in community theater, mostly acting, but I've also taken on roles as stage manager or crew chief from time to time. One night, I was crewing for a run of Shrek, the musical at a local theater. This place used to be an old-time movie theater before it was converted, and people kept warning me about friendly ghosts lurking around. They told me to be on the lookout, since the theater was supposedly haunted. Stuff like seeing people sitting in the audience during rehearsal, but when you turn to look at them, there was nobody there, though the seat would still be down. I brushed it off. Then, one night after rehearsal, I was backstage making sure all the lights were off and the doors were locked. I walked past our dragon puppet, which, if you've ever seen Shrek, the musical, you know is huge. It was controlled by two cast members with levers and pull strings to move the eyes, mouth, and wings. As I passed by, I swear I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. I stopped and glanced over, and that's when I saw it. The lever controlling the wings move on its own, causing the wings to flap a couple of times. I looked around, half expecting someone to be messing with me, but the room was empty. Then, to my surprise, the eyes blinked once, and the mouth opened and closed a couple of times, again completely on its own. I was freaked out, so I searched the entire backstage area and called out, but there was no one there but me. At that point, the dark backstage felt way too creepy, and I didn't need to stick around any longer. I practically ran out of there. Now, whenever someone talks about that theater and whether it's really haunted, I'm the one who chimes in with a simple, "I seen it." I have so many stories to share, but this one stands out. When I was a kid, I would always wake up to a tall man standing in my doorway. He wore a trench coat, and only when he bent down to come through the door did I see that he was wearing an old bowler hat. It was the kind of thing that left me frozen, unsure of what to do. My aunt, during the 80s satanic panic, got really into the occult. She had a Ouija board and would talk to the same spirit every day. One day, the spirit told her that if she ever had children, it would come back as her child and kill her. To this day, she's never had children. She tried to throw the board away, but every time she did, it would magically return to her house, placed right back on the shelf. She even tried to throw it in the river, and the same thing happened. Eventually, she decided to burn it in a trash can. As the flames rose, they turned blue, and the board screamed, a blood-curdling, painful scream. Freaked out, she took me for a walk to get away from the house. When we were coming back down her driveway, we both saw a muscular, all-black creature with glowing red eyes digging through the trash can. It looked up at us and ran off into the woods. We were in a remote mountain community, so it felt like something straight out of a nightmare. As a child, my mom worked for a wealthy old lady who had a mentally disabled adult daughter. In my young mind, I saw the daughter as a monster. She would torment me, even threatening to kill me. One night, I had a dream that I was in that lady's house, and the house was on fire. That same black, red-eyed monster was chasing me through the burning house. The next day, I woke up to hear that the old lady had tragically burned to death in a fire in her home. In high school, I had a terrifying experience. One night, I woke up in a panic, feeling like I needed to check on my little sister. I walked to her room, and everything was fine. But something told me to check the front of the house. When I opened the front door, everything was dark and on fire. It felt like a nightmare come to life. Panicked, I slammed the door shut and ran back to my room, thinking it was all just a bad dream. But when I jumped into my bed to hide under the covers, I saw my own body lying there. That's when I realized something was seriously wrong. As I jumped into bed, I woke up for real, but I felt like I was falling to my death. As an adult, I can only assume it was some kind of out-of-body experience. A few years later, when my parents divorced, my dad moved to a part of the country where the Underground Railroad and the Trail of Tears intersected. We ended up living in a historic plantation-style home. My room was upstairs, and no one else would sleep up there, just me. There's a whole bunch of events that happened in that house, but I'll tell you about one. I was walking through the front door one day when I saw a black man dressed in old slave clothes walking out. He didn't say anything, just walked past me as if he belonged there. About 20 years ago, I lived with my mother in a small house in a not-so-great part of town. I've always had very vivid, detailed dreams that felt more like experiences than just random scenes in my head. One night, I was deep asleep, having one of my usual intricate dreams. I can't exactly recall the details of it, but it was typical for me, full of vivid colors, sounds, and a complicated plot. Then, at some point, everything changed. The dream started to fade, warping into a strange gray void, accompanied by the sound of static, like the world was glitching. The next thing I knew, the dream was completely different. This time, it was a disturbing human figure lurching through dark, empty streets. It unsettled me, and I suddenly jolted awake. I glanced at the clock. It was 4:32 a.m. I'll never forget that time. The next morning, I was talking to my mom while we were taking care of my younger siblings. I mentioned the dream and told her the time I woke up. She looked at me in shock. Apparently, both of my siblings had woken up at exactly the same time, complaining about hearing wrong TV sounds, their way of describing static, and a scary man in their heads. Later that day, we found out that a neighbor had tragically taken his own life. The time of death? 4:32 nachts. I've worked in the healthcare field for many years now, and in that time, I've witnessed things that are hard to explain. More times than I can count, patients on their deathbed have told me about seeing an old man. They describe him as being dressed entirely in black, with a hat, and just staring at them. No matter how many times they ask him questions, he never speaks. I've come to believe that people often see things in their final moments. Some see children, some see family members, and others even see old pets. For the most part, these patients are calm, at peace, and seem comforted by what they see. But the ones who see this old man dressed in black, it's a completely different story. They seem to experience intense pain and stress, and are often tortured by his presence, all the way until they take their last breath. It's as if his stare weighs them down. It's unsettling, to say the least. I was 6 years old. I was staying at my aunt's house for a sleepover. She lived in the countryside, far from anything, with a big forest right behind her house. My cousins, brother, and I were all sleeping in the living room since we had asked to stay there a couple of hours earlier. My cousin and I were still wide awake, full of energy, so we decided to step outside for a few minutes. It was chilly, but not enough to send us straight back inside. We stood there, looking up at the stars, when suddenly, from the forest, we saw a tall figure emerge from the shadows. Its eyes were a piercing yellow, almost glowing. It stood there, staring at us for what felt like an eternity before we both panicked and ran back into the house. We didn't return to the living room. Instead, we grabbed my brother and another cousin and moved to a bedroom. My cousin locked the door behind him, and we stayed in that room, too scared to leave. We huddled together for hours, barely speaking. Then, just as I was starting to drift off, we heard banging on the bedroom door. We both shot up in an instant, grabbing whatever we could find. My cousin grabbed a baseball bat, and I grabbed his skateboard. Slowly, we approached the door, and when he unlocked it and opened it, there was nothing there. Shaken but hungry, we decided to make some sandwiches. But when I looked out the window, I froze. There was again those same yellow eyes, but this time the thing had a twisted, mutilated face and was drooling. I urgently turned to my cousin and told him to look, but by the time he did, it was gone. Needless to say, I didn't get much sleep that night. If you're from New Jersey, you're probably familiar with Weird NJ, a magazine dedicated to uncovering the haunted and spooky spots scattered across the state. One of the places featured is an old mental institution in Marlborough, which has been abandoned for years. Naturally, my friends and I thought it'd be a great idea to check it out. It was definitely creepy, but nothing too wild happened at first. We were young, feeling rebellious, so we found a room with no windows, just a door leading in, and decided to hang out, drink, and smoke. We were sipping on a bottle of vodka and passing around blunts like typical idiot kids. About 40 minutes passed, and by this point, we were all pretty tipsy. That's when it hit. Suddenly, the temperature dropped drastically. It wasn't just a slight chill, it was enough that we all noticed. Nobody said anything, but we all exchanged looks, silently agreeing it was time to leave. We didn't talk about it until we were outside. As we were walking toward the gate, which you had to climb through to get off the property, 2 cops pulled up out of nowhere. In a panic, we scattered into the woods. We ended up hiding for about 3 hours, trying not to get caught. Later, we found out that there were other kids there too, and when they tried to leave, they got arrested. That night still gives me the creeps. My grandmother's house was always a hot spot for strange, ghostly activity. Almost every member of my mother's side of the family has a story about that place. Before my grandparents moved in, the house had a tragic history. There was a large fire upstairs that started when the son of the previous family played with matches and set the curtains on fire. The attic door got stuck and the boy perished in the flames. A man tried to rescue him, but tragically, he died later from his injuries in the hospital. Years later, the upper level of the house was rebuilt and remodeled, and it became home to 2 spare bedrooms. But even after the renovations, strange things kept happening. You could often hear what sounded like a child running up and down the stairs. The fold-away bed in one of the rooms would shift across the floor, and when we checked, it was always in the opposite room from where we had left it. Sometimes, when you were home alone, you could hear someone talking or see shadows moving in the corner of your eye. But when you turned around, no one would be there. Despite all these odd happenings, I was still skeptical. I was young at the time and didn't really believe in ghosts or anything like that. I tried to explain it all away. One day, my younger cousin and I were sitting in my grandmother's kitchen when we suddenly heard the sound of a small child crying. We got up to investigate, and when we entered the living room, the crying stopped. We shrugged it off and went back to finish our meal, but a moment later, the crying started again. We assumed it might be our baby cousin, so we went outside to check. But she was fast asleep in the porch swing with our grandmother, just the 2 of them outside. Confused, we went back inside. And sure enough, the crying started up again. At this point, we thought maybe it was a toy, like one of those creepy baby dolls that make crying noises when you press a button. We searched the house, but we couldn't find anything that could explain the sound. It kept happening over and over until we finally panicked and ran outside to our grandmother. We were freaked out, but she calmly told us it was just our imagination. "You're hearing things," she said. It wasn't until years later that we found out about the fire and the people who died in the house. Apparently, this was something they never spoke about in front of the kids because they didn't want to scare us. To this day, I can't bring myself to be in that house alone. I moved into a new house share, and my room was on the top floor of a 4-story house. Every night, around 3 a.m., I would wake up to the sound of someone running up the stairs from the bottom floor, stopping right outside my door. The weird part? The stairs on each floor were separated by the entire length of the room, so the speed of the running didn't make sense. I figured it was just me being half asleep, brushing it off as my mind playing tricks on me. That is, until a new tenant moved into the room across from mine on the top floor. One day, she casually mentioned that she'd been hearing the same thing, someone running up the stairs every night. She said she'd lived in haunted houses before, so she recognized the signs immediately. She also mentioned that the energy in the house fell off, and I realized I had felt that too, though I hadn't really connected it to anything specific. I had been feeling more and more depressed in the months I'd lived there, but I hadn't understood why. To try to fix it, she brought a priest in to bless the house, and after that, the running noises stopped completely. I was driving through the woods late at night when I saw a figure partially materialize in the middle of the road. It passed through the beams of my headlights, and I could make out its legs and torso, like from the chest down. At first, I thought it was just a person, so I slammed on the brakes. The person sitting in the passenger seat saw it too. I think it's important to point out that you can be a huge fan of the paranormal, like I am, without fully believing in the theories behind it. I follow everything, find it incredibly fascinating, and hope that one day we'll figure out how to explain it all. To me, it's just science we haven't cracked yet. Take ghosts, for example. There are tons of stories of people seeing things they can't explain. That definitely suggests something's happening, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's spirits of the dead, for instance. Throughout my life, I've had several dreams that ended up coming true, right down to the tiniest detail. One of the most vivid was when I was in grade school, just before a car accident. I remember feeling really uneasy about going to the store that night, but my dad couldn't understand why. When it happened, it played out exactly like it had in my dream. Even now, thinking about it still gives me chills. One night, my wife and I were walking home through a dark field when, out of nowhere, something yanked on my ear, and I actually felt myself being pulled down. When we got home, I checked my ear and noticed the barbell was completely bent in the middle. Even now, no matter how hard I try, I can't seem to straighten it out. It's still like that to this day. I used to work at this old historic theater that had a reputation for being haunted. The story goes that an actress vanished without a trace one night during a performance. She went back to her dressing room between acts, and no one ever saw her again. There was no sign of foul play, just gone. Over the years, both patrons and staff claimed to have seen the ghost of the actress playing little pranks here and there. People would hear the rustling of taffeta and catch a faint whiff of perfume. One of the managers even told me that the ghost once shoulder-checked him while he was walking down the stairs, along with several other eerie experiences I can't quite recall now. One afternoon, I was alone in the building, moving some inventory or rearranging tables. Can't remember exactly. But as I was walking across the balcony lobby, I suddenly felt something press against my shin, making me stumble a bit. It wasn't like being tripped by a solid object or someone's foot. It felt more like electricity, pure energy, and left a tingling sensation that lingered for a few seconds. I wouldn't call myself a believer, but I remember thinking, maybe, just maybe. When I was finally tall enough to reach the sink, I started helping out more in the kitchen. We had a big window in front of the sink, and it always freaked me out. I tried to avoid washing dishes at night, but it seemed like I ended up there almost every evening. Without fail, I'd see this tall figure sitting on the roof outside the front of the house, right by the window. It terrified me, but my mom always brushed it off as child nonsense. Years later, I found out that the boy who had lived in the house before us had died by suicide. Apparently, his favorite spot was outside his window, and he would climb up onto the roof. When I heard this, I asked my mom what they meant by it. She just said, "He's with heaven now." I replied something along the lines of, "Well, he's not there yet. He's still sitting on the roof. I see him there. This was a month after he died." Even now, it gives me chills. I don't just brush things off as child nonsense anymore. I don't usually believe in what people refer to as paranormal phenomena. However, there was this one time when I had an out-of-body experience. I was lying in bed when I suddenly felt like something was pulling me by my ankles. I slid down the bed in the direction of the pull, and before I knew it, I was looking at myself and my partner still asleep in front of me. I could see the room exactly as it was, even noticing some intricate light patterns cast by the moonlight coming through the skylight. Then I started rising up, but panic set in, and I quickly rushed back into my body. I woke up, and everything in the room was exactly how I had just seen it. To this day, I still chalk it up to being a dream. I was asleep, some weird stuff happened. It must have been a dream, but I can't help feeling uneasy when I think back on it. I was in the hospital for a minor surgery and was given calming meds before the procedure. Afterward, I was placed in a recovery room. A doctor came in and told me. The surgery was successful, and they had removed everything. What they found was a really rare anomaly. They were going to transfer me to another hospital. The doctor left and went to the control room down the hall. The room had no exits, and after a few minutes, I asked a nurse if I could speak to the doctor again. She looked at me, clearly confused, and told me there hadn't been any doctor there. It felt off. I mentioned it to my mom when she visited. The next day, I had a real doctor visit me, and the post-surgery lab result had just arrived. To my surprise, everything the doctor in my vision had said turned out to be true, including details that could not have been known in advance. On top of that, my family members have experienced dreams that predicted future events. If I were to deny these occurrences, I'd be rejecting a part of reality just because it doesn't seem reasonable enough, which would feel intellectually dishonest. I've had a lot of strange experiences, but the one that really made me believe in something beyond the ordinary happened when we lived in a house as kids. My sister and I, both around 4 and 6 years old, shared a room. Often, we'd wake each other up in the middle of the night because we'd see a man standing in our doorway. It was always the same man. I guess he was in his mid-20s, a white guy with dirty blonde hair, blue eyes, wearing a bloody white t-shirt and blue jeans. It was terrifying, and no matter how many times we saw him, it never felt less frightening. It wasn't exactly scary, but one time my cousin and I got lost in the woods. We were trying to find our way out when a butterfly appeared. It seemed like it was guiding us, leading us back home. When we reached the driveway, the butterfly tried to cross it but couldn't. Instead, it flew back into the woods, almost like it was signaling that our journey wasn't quite over. This happened in first grade, and I couldn't sleep that night. Our class went on a field trip to a replica of an 1800s house. We were upstairs when I saw a doll sitting on a shelf. Out of nowhere, The doll turned its head and blinked right at me. I'm still not sure if I imagined it or if I'm losing my mind. I was home alone, just watching TV, can't remember exactly what, when I saw a small figure dart across the corner of my eye. I turned to look, and my vacuum cleaner, which was attached to the wall, had just fallen to the ground. I totally freaked out and left for a friend's house. To this day, nobody believes me, and before that, I was someone who thought none of this paranormal stuff was real. I still live in the same house, and so far, nothing else has happened. I constantly go back and forth on whether I believe in ghosts. I dream about them. I've had visible hallucinations, though I've never been diagnosed, and I once had a strange experience at the mall. I was just waiting for someone, lost in my thoughts, when a woman's voice, low and close to my right ear, asked, "Can I help you?" I looked around, but no one was near me. No one even seemed to notice me or act like they were speaking to me. It really freaked me out because I've never experienced audible hallucinations before. On top of that, I have a condition called hyperacusis, which makes me extremely sensitive to sound. I'm currently being treated for it, but it means I sometimes hear things that others don't. It's pretty unsettling to realize that I can hear more than most people. I live in a converted farmhouse, and there's this massive grand room attached to the original part of the house. For as long as I've lived here, there's been this strange knocking sound. It only happens when I'm alone in the house and when there's no music or TV on. The knocks are sporadic, but there's a weird recurring pattern to them. I've checked. There's nothing leaning against the house outside, nothing vibrating into the walls from inside, and no woodpeckers along the roofline. There's really no explanation for it, yet the sound persists. It's been going on for at least 16 years. I've never seen anything, and I've never felt threatened, but it's one of those things that's hard to ignore. It's just interesting. There's this tall, shadowy figure, always wearing a top hat, that's been following me since I was a kid. One night, I had sleep paralysis, completely frozen, and I could see this ugly, old woman sitting on my chest. I tried screaming for help, but no sound came out. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the shadow figure, this tall guy in the top hat, walking toward me. He reached forward, grabbed the woman, and threw her off me. It freaked me out so much that I literally pissed my pants at 14. I've never really told anyone about it until now, but after that night, I started calling the shadow figure Randy. Over the years, anyone who's messed with me has mentioned weird stuff happening to them involving this same shadow figure. They've all said bad things were said to them or that something nasty happened to them, all connected to Randy. I don't know what it means or why he's looking out for me, but at least I know he's got my back. When I was about 6 years old, I was sleeping at the foot of my parents' bed when I suddenly woke up. Right in front of me was the face of an older man wearing a hat, someone I'd never seen before. What stood out to me the most was that the figure didn't look like a full person, but more like a framed photo, almost flat in appearance. The moment I saw it, I leapt about 4 feet in the air and scrambled between my parents for safety. Later, we moved to an older house that was said to be haunted. I was sharing a bed with my parents again, and I remember looking over my mom's shoulder to see a dark figure standing right above her, looming over us. I didn't mention this to anyone at the time, but later my sister-in-law told me that she had seen a dark figure sitting on top of a cupboard in the hallway. Here are some stories from my family that made us all believe in ghosts. When my grandpa passed away suddenly from cardiac arrest in Budapest, my grandma was heartbroken and unaware of what had happened. But 2 strange things started happening. My grandpa had been a surgeon, and out of nowhere, surgery-related books began falling off the shelves by themselves. My grandma also had some large tumors on her face, ones that could have turned cancerous. My grandpa had begged her to let him remove them when he was alive, but she was terrified of any kind of medical procedure. After his death, The tumors miraculously disappeared on their own, something that should have been medically impossible. My grandma had an encounter with a close relative who had passed away. One day, while she was crying, the person suddenly materialized in front of her and said, "Why are you crying? I'm in a nice place now." Then, just as quickly, they disappeared. After my grandpa passed, my grandma shared her large apartment with another older man. He owned a house in the Hungarian countryside where they would go on vacations. One night, my grandma saw a woman walking down the hallway in a nightgown. The next day, she mentioned this to her friend, and after looking at some photos, it was clear the woman was his deceased ex-wife. As for me, I haven't had any big experiences, but I've had a few small ones. One day, I was at my parents' house talking with my mom about New York and how nice it was. Right at that moment, we both heard a woman's voice, as if it was in the room, but also somehow in the air, saying very loudly, "For sure." I guess she really loved New York. One summer night, I was alone at home while my husband was away. Suddenly, the atmosphere became strange, cold, and unsettling. My normally calm cat became alert and started following something with her eyes. I checked for bugs, but there was nothing there. She seemed frightened, but she stayed by me, growling softly, her tail puffed up as she stared into thin air. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the coldness lifted, my cat calmed down, and the room returned to normal. I'm pretty sure a spirit passed through my apartment that night. Oh, I almost forgot this one. Before she became my nanny, my adoptive grandma worked for a wealthy family. The father of the family passed away, and one day she opened the door to the bathroom and saw him sitting on the toilet. He quickly vanished right before her eyes. To end on a sweet note, I had a cat named Nathy, and we were inseparable. We had the same personality and were always together. She'd get sick whenever I left, and I hated leaving her behind. She passed away in 2014, and I still miss her dearly. Occasionally, I have these dreams that don't really feel like dreams. I find myself in my room, everything normal, and suddenly, Nathy jumps onto my bed like she used to. We cuddle just like before, and I tell her how much I miss her. In the dream, I can see it in her eyes. She replies, "Me too." Then, after a while, she has to go, and she disappears. I don't know if it's a dream or something else, but it's a memory I hold close. Thankfully, I now have my amazing cat, Bua, to keep me company, and my husband, of course. There are many more paranormal stories in my family, but these are the ones I know best and hold closest to my heart. So, yes, I absolutely believe in the paranormal. It scares me, but it can also bring a sense of comfort in certain moments. When I was a kid, I had 3 spirits in my childhood home. I gave them names, though some of them were more intimidating than others. One, I called Michael Jackson because he liked to sit on my bed while I played video games. Another one, the one that stayed in the closet and didn't come out much, I named Jacob. As for the third one, I never gave it a name because it terrified me. Jacob seemed to be the leader of the group, though. We decided it was time for the others to go back into the closet. They listened without question. I'm pretty sure there was a portal in that closet, but it stayed mostly contained there, never really venturing too far. We lived in that house from when I was 9 to 13, and that's when these strange experiences happened. I was unpacking some boxes recently and came across the toys my grandmother had knitted for any future children I might have when she knew her time was running short. Even though many years had passed since her death, I suddenly found myself in tears, overwhelmed by a wave of sadness. You know that feeling when a long-forgotten grief gets triggered and it feels like your heart is breaking all over again? As I stood there, my partner came over to comfort me with a hug. But as he wrapped his arms around me, I looked over his shoulder and through the window, where I saw one of the brightest, most vibrant rainbows I've ever witnessed. And in that moment, a sense of calm washed over me, almost like the soothing reassurance a grandmother gives when you've had a bad dream or a scraped knee. It felt like she was there, comforting me again, reminding me everything would be okay. I've had other strange experiences before, but I always chalk them up to wishful thinking. People often find meaning in coincidences, especially when it involves loved ones who have passed. But after that moment, I can't help but feel differently. There is something about it that I can't quite explain, but it was deeply comforting. I'm not so sure now that it was just coincidence. The first house I rented, after a string of lousy apartments, was a craftsman duplex built around 1900 and 1905, located near the downtown area of a large Midwestern city. Among other strange things that happened, one in particular stands out. Every night, when my girlfriend and I would get ready for bed, we'd hear a sound that resembled a wooden rocking chair rocking steadily on a wooden floor. It would start off quietly, then gradually increase in volume and speed to the point where it would make normal conversation almost impossible before slowly fading out again. This whole cycle would take about 10 to 15 minutes. It happened every single night for about a month, and just as abruptly as it had started, it stopped. The neighboring side of the duplex was vacant, so we couldn't blame it on anyone next door. The sound would fill the entire room. I even went around the house, trimming branches and making sure nothing was brushing against the exterior, trying to find a logical explanation. What made it even stranger was that we were in our early 20s, both working full-time jobs, and were social enough that our bedtimes would vary greatly, depending on whether it was a weekday or a weekend. Yet, the sound always started right when we were trying to fall asleep. It wasn't just a coincidence, we both heard it. I considered the possibility of a hypnagogic hallucination, but there was one problem: we both heard it. It's funny, though, because I'd never had sleep paralysis until after I moved out of that house. I started experiencing awful hypnagogic sleep paralysis, complete with vivid auditory hallucinations, in the new house I purchased about 5 years later, all the way across the country. The hallucinations lasted the entire time I lived there, only stopping as soon as I moved out. And since then, nothing. I now live in a large, old home situated in a forest of ancient oak trees, which sat vacant for a decade before I bought it from the estate of the previous owners. They built it custom and lived in it most of their lives. Definitely the type of house you'd expect to be haunted, but nothing. It's been completely quiet. Something I just realized while writing all of this is that the only common factor between these two homes where I had these experiences was that they were the only places I lived with my then girlfriend. I can't help but wonder if she might have picked something up somewhere along the way. If she did, I really hope she's long rid of it now. This story takes me back to my own experience, which stands out mainly because I have a background in philosophy. For a while during my teens and early 20s, I was an atheist. And yes, it was an experience like the one I'm about to share that ultimately ended my atheism. Apologies in advance if this post turns into something of a novel, and perhaps it's not written the best, but this is an experience I've carried with me for 5 years now, and it still blows my mind. So, a couple of times a month, after one of our classes, the students and department professors would head out to grab a bite and chat. I usually went, though I've always been the type to avoid social situations initially, even though I end up enjoying them once I'm there. On this particular day, I was leaning toward going home and just unwinding by myself, but as I was pulling out of the campus parking lot, I decided to go. I had this feeling that I would regret missing out on something important if I just stayed in. At that point in my life, I was feeling lost, like my life wasn't going anywhere. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I felt behind on the goals I had set for myself. I even started wondering if those goals mattered at all, if I should just give up on the path I was on. It was a stressful time, and I suspect some undiagnosed depression might have played a role too. Then, during the meal, someone at the table brought up the exact thoughts I had been grappling with, about feeling lost and unsure of the future. We ended up discussing it for a while, and by the time I left, I felt much better. It was comforting to realize that I wasn't alone in feeling this way. My peers offered me hope, reminding me that things would eventually fall into place if I stayed patient and kept an open mind. After these lunches, I often stopped by a local store to hang out for a bit before heading home. There were two stores I usually picked from. One was a bit out of the way, and the other was right near the restaurant. On this day, my instinct was to go to the closer one, but something nudged me to choose the more distant one. So, I went to the farther store, and for some reason, I didn't do my usual routine of checking out the front of the store. Instead, I walked straight to the back. As I rounded the corner, I stopped in my tracks. There in front of me was a woman with a large handbag slung over her shoulder, facing me. On the side of the bag, I saw these words: "For I know the plans I have for you. Plans to give you hope and a future." This is a partial quote from the book of Jeremiah 29:11. I was momentarily stunned. I composed myself and then continued browsing, positioning myself so my back was to the woman as I looked at the items on my side of the shelf. A moment later, I turned around again and she was gone. I even looked around for her, but she was nowhere to be found. I can't describe how deeply I was shaken by this experience. It was one of those rare moments that gave me chills. Now, I'm not saying that the woman was some sort of supernatural being. What strikes me is the sheer improbability of the series of events that led me to be standing in the exact spot where I could read those words on her purse. If I had been just a few seconds later, I would have missed it completely, as she would have moved on. Nothing like that has ever happened to me before, and nothing like it has happened since. The experience only deepened my conviction that there was something meaningful behind that moment. I'm not one of those people who believes that God constantly intervenes in everyone's life, and I still don't think that's the case. In fact, I have relatives who have had experiences like this, and I believe they're mistaken in their interpretations. So for me to view that event as more than a coincidence, it's completely out of character, but I can't shake the feeling that I was meant to be there in that moment. I completely understand if others think it was just a coincidence, that I was merely pulling meaning out of thin air when I needed it the most. I respect that perspective, and I might agree with it, if not for one thing. I just can't. I'm convinced that I was exactly where I needed to be to see that message. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and we will see you in the next video.